ITIL, Configuration Management. Ah, the acronym. So tiny, so compact, so powerful, so fickle. Why do I say fickle? Because one string of abbreviations can mean so many things. I mean, ATM. Is it asynchronous transfer mode, or is it automated teller machine? And don't even get me started with something like PCS. Oh yeah, look it up on Wikipedia sometime. Well, you already heard the acronym CI several times throughout this series. Remember, change instance, change item, etc.? Well, CI, as far as we're concerned, is officially going to stand for configuration item in this particular Nugget movie and here on out. And what is a CI, or configuration item? Well, it's right there in that service transition book of the ITIL library. It's any component that has to be managed in order to deliver an IT service. Information about each configuration item is recorded in a configuration record, and it goes into the configuration management system, or the configuration management database. And it's maintained throughout its life cycle by whom? You guessed it, configuration management. And we're going to talk about that IT service in this nugget. In this ITIL CBT Nugget movie on configuration management, we've got 4 knowledge goals. First of all, we'll look at concepts and the objectives of configuration management. We'll look at the benefits of configuration management for your organization when adhering to an ITIL framework. Then we'll look at the configuration management activities and processes. And then finally, some of the costs and the challenges or problems in implementing configuration management. First of all, let's look at some concepts and objectives of configuration management. The goal of configuration management is basically to keep the information about the IT infrastructure current as possible. And this means all the way down to the granular details of each individual configuration item and its relationship to other configuration items. You want reliable records of the details of your IT components and services that your organization is providing. You want to provide accurate information, accurate documentation. Why? Well, because this is going to support other IT services and IT service management processes like change management, incident management, problem management, and our new friend, release management. It makes sure, it guarantees if possible, that the changes are being properly logged or documented. We referred to this earlier as the reporting action, the reporting process. Another goal or objective of configuration management is to maintain an accurate topology of the existing configuration items. So this is one of our main concepts, the CI, the configuration item. What is a configuration item? Well, I don't need to draw you a diagram here. You're familiar with these things. These are servers, file servers, print servers, application servers, database servers, mini computers, mainframe computers, workstations, desktop PCs, laptop PCs, database storage units, laser printers, monitors, modems, wireless devices, network interface cards, removable disk drives, wide area network components like routers and switches and multi-layer switches and VPN concentrators and firewall appliances, intrusion prevention system appliances, all these things, even the software suites that you're using. For example, Microsoft Office, that's a configuration item, of course. Even your security policy or your organizational policy or your organizational chart, these can also be configuration items. All of the documentation that your company does, its plans, its manuals, its processes, its procedures, its service level agreements, whether it's in hard copy, whether it's stored in files and network shares, or whether it's stored in a web intranet, these can all be configuration items. So one of the main goals is to maintain an accurate topology of that, to provide information about product policy. You know, what IT components are you using? How many do you have? What are the versions? What are the model numbers? How long have you been using them? Are you going to be phasing out any IT components? What do you need to update or upgrade? Is anything going to become end of life in the next 12 to 18 months? How about your licensing? Do you have all of your licenses up to date for your workstation OSs and your server OSs and your network devices like your Cisco routers and switches? Do you have any maintenance contracts for these products? How standardized is your IT infrastructure? Is it open standard or is it proprietary? This is the kind of stuff that's going to be stored by configuration management. Also, your troubleshooting data, okay? Disaster recovery processes, backup processes, topologies, physical topologies of your networked equipment, wired and wireless. What are all the troubleshooting tickets and issues from incident management that you have existing for these different products? Troubleshooting data. Impact on your organization if one of these configuration items fails or is destroyed or is stolen. Also, the provisioning of services. The provisioning of network bandwidth, for example, would be a prime candidate for configuration management. So that breaks down the CI concept. But what about the CMDB? Well, we're going to look at the CMDB here on the next slide. That's our configuration management database, and we'll talk more about that. But I want you to focus on one key point that you'll need to understand for the ITIL. You may be familiar with the concept of asset management, okay? Managing the individual assets of your organization, your company. But realize that configuration management goes well beyond asset management. Asset management is really an accounting process. You monitor assets based on what was the purchase price, how long have you had this asset. You keep records like that. You keep records of depreciation, okay, so that you can do this for tax purposes, for fiscal services. The asset management system can be a basis or it can be the fundamental starting point for setting up your configuration management system, but configuration management goes farther, okay? It's going to keep technical information on configuration items. It's going to keep detailed information about the relationship between configuration items. For example, what's the relationship between your desktop PCs, your laptops and your laser printers, and your switch, okay? Location, addressing, port information, those types of things. So it's also going to focus on the standardization or proprietary nature of your solution. Configuration management is also going to have an ongoing process of monitoring feedback about the current information, like the status of your IT components, where they're located, and any changes that have been made to them. So it works very closely with change management. So a key fundamental here is asset management is a starting point, but it's more of a fiscal, accounting, financial interest as opposed to the technical aspect of configuration management. Now, as we're going to see in this nugget and the ones to follow, configuration management, along with release management that we looked at earlier, both fall under the umbrella of change management, the overall change management policy of your business or your organization, which is globally controlled by what we call service level management. And we'll look at service level management, I think, in nugget number 10 of this ITIL series. Now, what book does this come from? It comes from the service transition book of the ITI library. And one of the main components, as we've seen, of configuration management is the CMDB, the Configuration Management Database. And this database is simply more than just files or data stored on a hard drive, okay? It's a database store and it's a system of configuration records that are maintained for configuration, for change and release through the life cycle of the CI. The CMDB is part of a configuration management system, or a CMS, that's going to contain one or more CMDBs. The ITIL version 3 service transition book states the configuration management system is a set of tools and databases that are implemented to manage and control the IT service provider's configuration data. A CMS will also have information about incidents, known errors, problems, changes and releases, and it even may have some data about employees, customers, suppliers and their locations, users and business units. So this is more than just simply data stored, let's say, in a SQL Server database. Okay, the configuration management system is going to have tools for collecting, storing, managing, updating, mining, and presenting this data about all the configuration items, the CIs, and the relationships they have to each other. Okay, the configuration management system is maintained by configuration management, and it's going to be used by all of the IT service management processes, all the ones we've talked about so far in this Nugget series and the ones that we're going to talk about here in the future. So each one of these databases is going to store attributes of configuration items and their interrelationships. Let's take a sidebar here really quickly. Let's talk about some of these attributes of the CIs in the database. Now, this is not a database nugget, so I don't want you to get too bogged down in how databases function and they operate. That's beyond the scope of this ITIL. CBT Nuggets has tons of different training modules to help you learn database management and database systems. Let's just look at some of the attributes of configuration items, some of the things you would find in this CMDB. A wise man once said, "Facts, apart from their relationships, are like labels on empty bottles." And that really applies to this configuration management database. The relationships are important, and a lot of the information that's stored in the attributes about the CI have to do with relationships to other CIs and to other IT services. Now, in this database, as far as the ITIL is concerned, two attributes, or you can consider these fields in a database or a spreadsheet, but two attributes are mandatory. Each one of the entries must have a unique identifier. So each CI has some type of alphanumeric, and I'll just jot down here alpha N, alphanumeric identifier. Then each ITIL CI must have a status. And we talked about the different statuses early on in this Nugget series. So unique ID and status. Then beyond that, we've got lots of different optional attributes. And it depends on what type of configuration item it is, what type of IT service it's related to, whether it's software, whether it's hardware, whether it's a service, that dictates which attributes you're going to use. Now you can see here some of the attributes might be revision numbers, which are used on software and hardware, the location, okay, owner of the software, owner of the component, asset number, the manufacturer, which would apply to hardware, manufacturer, manufacturer serial number, manufacturer part number. Okay, so you can see some of these things are hardware related, some are software related, some can apply to both. Like cost, for example, could apply to both software and hardware, or even some contracted service or consulting service. Release date, expiry date, which would apply to software. Configuration details. Configuration details could be things like storage capacity, license type, the network connection speed, the number of licenses, the processor type, the RAM, things like that. License data, license information. If you're using, let's say, certificate services as part of an IT security solution, your certificates and your digital certificates and digital signatures may have lifetimes, okay? That lifetime information, the date and time stamp, kind of a when it starts and when it ends could be stored as well. Links to documentation. This is kind of really needs to go down here in this third category. This is where we get the interoperability, the interrelationships. And again, relational database management systems are based upon creating relationships between the many tables in the database. And so just like you have many databases in a CM database system or a CMS, a database itself could have multiple tables, and these tables could have other links, fields that link them to other tables, like RFC numbers, request for change numbers that can be common to multiple configuration items. Change numbers, problem numbers, incident numbers. So under the domain of incident management or problem management or change management, you may have your own numbers or identifiers, and those fields in those tables can be linked to other tables in this configuration management database. Again, I don't want to get too bogged down in how databases operate, but you can see these relationships here. And this is how management can use this information. They can mine this information. They can report from this information. They can use modeling tools to draw conclusions from this information to help them plan and deploy and implement and make changes for the future. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, remember, the configuration management database is designed, okay? This is an elaborative process to design the database. It's going to be based on a configuration structure, or what we also know as a schema. A good example of a configuration structure design or a schema would be Windows 2003 or Windows Vista Active Directory, which has a configuration structure or a schema. So will your configuration management database. That's, of course, up to the database designers. However, some of the ITIL management personnel may be part of the team or the working group that develops this database. Think of this CMS, okay, the configuration management system, as like versioning control software, software that developers use to develop applications or programs or modular programs, things like VMS, SCM, and WebDAV. Perhaps you're familiar with that. Before we dive into the activities and the processes of configuration management, let's review the benefits, okay, the pros of configuration management IT service. First of all, it allows us to better manage our IT components and services. That's pretty general, but to get more specific, it contributes to a faster troubleshooting process, a faster problem-solving process, and a more quicker change processing. It gives us a better handle on software and hardware in our organization. It improves our security and our compliance to government initiatives like HIPAA or Sarbanes-Oxley, for example. It facilitates enhanced planning for procurement of hardware and software and our expenditures. It allows us to support capacity management and availability management. It's our foundation for IT continuity management. Now, we're going to talk more about these different types of management and services in upcoming Nugget movies, but in a nutshell, capacity management is a service design book initiative. It's the process that's responsible for making sure that the capacity of IT services and the capacity of our IT infrastructure is able to deliver those service level targets based on our service level agreements, and to do it in a cost-effective and timely manner. Capacity management is going to take into consideration all the resources necessary to deliver an IT service. It's going to be involved in short, medium, and long-term planning and long-term business requirements. Availability management, as we're going to find out later, is also from the service design book. And availability management is the process that's responsible for defining, analyzing, planning, measuring, and making improvements to every aspect of the availability of IT services. In other words, trying to achieve the highest percentage of uptime available. This also is tied into our service level targets for availability. And then finally, we have configuration management supporting IT continuity management. In ITIL version 3, IT continuity management is now considered or referred to as CSI. No, not like the TV show Crime Scene Investigators or whatever that is. It's continual service improvement. Okay, this deals with continuous availability and continuous operation of IT services, trying to achieve 100% availability. So continuity management or continual service improvement is a particular stage in the life cycle of certain IT services. It's responsible for managing improvements to the IT service management process and IT services. This deals with performance of IT services and IT infrastructure. The goal to increase efficiency, effectiveness, and cost effectiveness. So configuration management is going to support these other three IT services that we're going to look at later on in this ITIL Nugget series: capacity management, availability management, and IT continuity management, or CSI, continual service improvement. Remember earlier I mentioned that configuration management is going to facilitate change management and, to an extent, release management. This diagram is going to show that relationship between these IT services. Now, if you look at the far left here, we know about change management. We know what goes into it. We know we've got the request for change, we've got classification and planning, the release aspect, the implementation activity, the evaluation activity, and then of course we get to closure. But in the implementation phase, you also are going to interact between change management implementation and the release and distribution aspect of release management. So while you're implementing changes, you're going to be distributing releases. We understand that. Well, how does that tie into configuration management? Well, during the implementation activity of a change item, when you're, for example, releasing or distributing some type of software or hardware solution, in doing that, configuration management will work with the updating of the configuration management database based on the implementation of the item, its release and distribution data, its information. It's also going to update the DSL and the DML that we talked about earlier as well. Remember the definitive software library and the definitive media library. Now let's look at configuration management. The activities of configuration management work this way. They facilitate change management by reporting, logging, and auditing based on requests for change and the associated configuration changes. It'll also generate reports based on the classification and planning of the change. Remember, change management is more of a logical design activity where release management and configuration management are more technical in nature. They're more hands-on. So as you have a release, if the change leads to, let's say, a software release, maybe a version release, we're going to update the configuration item details in the CMDB based on that release information. We've already talked about updating the CMDB and the DSL/DML for implementation of distribution and release of software or hardware. And then at the bottom here, configuration management is going to interact with the closure of a change in our organization by verifying a verification process that everything has been updated properly in the configuration management database. So now that we see these relationships and how configuration management interacts with the IT services of change management and release management, and how it's really the kind of the technical interface or the hands-on interface to the configuration management database, as well as the definitive software library and definitive media library, let's look at the processes and activities of configuration management. Configuration management process has 6 activities or 6 actions. You've got planning, identification, control, status accounting, or accounting for the status, verification, and then finally reporting or documentation. In the planning phase of configuration management, you have to define within service management the aim, the goals, the objectives, the priorities, and the scope of the configuration management initiative. It has to be aligned with the business goals and business objectives. In the identification step or activity, this is where you're going to lay out the actual scope of the configuration. Is it software? Is it hardware? Is it a service? If your infrastructure uses a modular design, the scope might be the access layer between switches and endpoints, end devices like network printers, laptops, workstations, PCs, handheld devices. Identification and scope will also relate to defining the naming conventions, versioning numbering, identifying the physical components of the IT infrastructure, making sure that it has proper documentation, also documenting the relationship between these components and their relative attributes. In other words, the identification process and scope might simply be where you generate the different fields for the database. Remember earlier, the identification process or activity is where you come up with the mandatory unique identifier and the status of the CI. Also, all of the other attributes that apply to the software, hardware, or service, as well as the other linked attributes to change numbers, problem numbers, incident numbers. In other words, this is identification or the scope. In other words, the fields of your database entry. This is where you determine the physical relationships of the CIs, the logical relationships, the level of detail or attributes that you're going to have in the database. In other words, are you going to have 10 fields or are you going to have 30 fields? How much information, how much granularity are you going to have for each configuration item? If you're taking a modular design approach, you might want to lay out in a graphical format, maybe in Visio, the different modules of your organization and the sub-modules under software and hardware and services, getting a topology of your infrastructure. The bottom line, identification and scope. Control really comes down to database management or a database management system, making sure that each change to the database is atomic. Okay, making sure that the CMDB is always up to date and you're only adding, recording, and monitoring based on the authorized policy and the identified configuration items. You're going to make sure that no configuration items added to the database are changed or replaced or removed without the right documentation, without the right permissions, without an approved request for change, and also making sure that you're doing it adhering to good standard database management practices. For example, not creating duplicate records or improper links between tables, keeping database integrity. This is all under the aspect of control. The activity of status accounting under the auspices of configuration management is made up of laying out, this could be done through a project management software tool, the life cycle of a component. And you divide the life cycle of this component or a configuration item, for example, let's say the laptop computer, into a number of stages of the life cycle of that laptop computer. Okay, and you'll have a status code assigned to each one of these stages. For example, with laptops, you might have a planned or on order stage where you're going to Dell or HP and you're ordering the product. Then you receive the laptop, so it's in a received and in stock stage, boxed up somewhere at your organization. Then you take it out of the box and it goes into the tested phase or the tested stage where you test the device in a pilot environment or a prototypical environment to your production environment. And then it goes from the tested stage to the implementation phase. So now the status of that laptop is implemented. It's been in operation now for a couple of months. It's now in the operational stage or operational phase. Maybe it's brought offline to be updated or upgraded or modified. Okay, it's in the maintenance stage. So the status of the device is maintenance. Once you're done with the device, you out of life it, take it out of service, and you archive it. So you have archived information about that device. So you see that one single configuration item, that laptop, goes through several different types of status. This is all going to be accounted for in the CMDB database. For example, as I mentioned, you've got, let's say, all those different stages: planned, received, tested, implemented, operational, maintenance, and archived. You could assign a number, let's say 001, 002, to each one of these different phases. Following me here? And then what happens is you've got a field of the database. As a matter of fact, as we talked about, from the ITIL version 3 standard, the status field is considered mandatory. So each configuration item, let's say you've got a laptop device and it knows you have a unique identifier. That's one of the mandatory fields, a unique ID, and then you've got a status field which will have a value of 001 to 007. Okay, so if the status field has a value of 004, then we know that that device has actually been implemented. It's already been tested and it's been implemented, but it has not been operational for a certain period of time. If it's been operational for, let's say, 90 days, then of course this status could change from 004 to 005. Let me just get rid of that real quick. 005. If you bring it out for maintenance, the status changes to 006. And you can see these fields can be updated based on just simple front-end graphical user interfaces that you have at the service desk or that you have as part of the configuration management process that updates these fields through the life cycle of this configuration item. In this case, an IBM ThinkPad laptop computer. Pretty cool. The next activity is verification. This could also be referred to as auditing, okay? An ongoing verification and auditing process, making sure that the CMDB is up to date, making sure that the processes that are in place to track and change the status of that laptop, for example, are working properly, making sure that the interoperability of the software, the front-end software to the database is working properly, asking questions all along the way to audit the process. For example, are all the requests for changes, are all the stages of implementation, is all this recorded in the CMDB? Is configuration management in control of the process? Is the information up to date? Do the contents of the definitive software library or the definitive media library or the definitive hardware store, do they accurately correspond with the database? So this auditing should be done on a periodic process to make sure that everything is functioning properly. Kind of like taking your car into a shop for the tune-up. And then finally, the final process is the reporting or the documentation process. Remember, the key to good design is document, document, document. Everything must be reported and documented so that you can take the information, you can analyze it, and you can constantly improve. Remember the very first couple of nugget movies of this ITIL series. We talked about one of the main goals of ITIL is constant improvement, constant enhancement to information technology infrastructure. Finally, let's explore some of the costs and the challenges to configuration management. Again, one of the costs is simply adding hardware, software, licenses, and fees to the bottom line of your organization. Business expenditures. There's also the cost of managing and implementing the database, the configuration management system design, implementation, and ongoing maintenance. Some of the challenges are designing the CMDB improperly, having erroneous scope, or errors in configuration item details, bad database system design. Another challenge might be taking the organization from a manual system where you've got a paper-based, ad hoc, on-the-fly configuration management system to an automated database system. The time it takes to do that, the transition time, the overhead, the downtime, the training, there's going to be a painful, awkward period there. Another problem is the effect of sudden changes to IT services and overreaching schedules. Remember, we're dealing with several IT services here that are working in concert, that are working simultaneously. And it's possible that through the project management aspect, you can have schedules that either overlap improperly or overreach as far as resources are concerned, time, personnel, and money. Another challenge is getting buy-in or support from upper management or stakeholders in the organization. And finally, like other IT services, there's always the vulnerable situation where users and or customers will end up bypassing the configuration management process altogether and implement their changes to configuration without going through the proper channels and the proper procedures. In this CBT nugget of the ITIL version 3 series, we looked at configuration management and 4 key objectives. First of all, we looked at the concepts and objectives of configuration management, the benefits and advantages, then configuration management activities or processes, and then finally, the costs and challenges or problems of configuration management. I hope this CBT nugget's been informative for you. I want to thank you for viewing. We'll see you next time.